Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Were you diagnosed late in life with ASD or ADHD? Well, my next guest, Amy O'Keefe, who is an archaeologist PhD student, was just that. She was diagnosed this February with ADHD and ASD, and we talk about how it's affected her studies, how she's living with it, and what she's doing about it, and much, much more. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage, and I'll see you on the other side. See you there. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Amy O'Keefe. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Not a problem.
Absolutely
So why don't
delighted.
you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I am an Irish archaeologist. I've done my undergrad, I've done my master's, and I'm working on my PhD. And only earlier this year, I was diagnosed with ASD or autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. And I had suspected it most of my life, at least for the autism part, but it just wasn't picked up on in school. So I suppose like academia was definitely, it's a unique challenge being undiagnosed, but still knowing something wasn't quite right. But yes, my research areas, I suppose, are specifically ancient Greece and prehistoric time periods. And I like to examine the material culture, specifically like bones, human remains, that kind of thing. But it's always like I tend to gravitate towards very gendered topics. In my master's, I did kind of matricentric or motherhood and the representations of that and how we write about it, because archaeology is a bit of a problematic subject in its inception, because it was more of a gentlemanly a hobby rather than anything else. So there's a lot of biases, sexism, racism, the full battering ram, all of it. So it's kind of important to delve back into that and kind of chip away at it. And yeah, I think I have that unique perspective, I suppose, to do so, hopefully.
So you were diagnosed this year.
Yes, I was diagnosed this year, February, in fact. But again, like I kind of suspected for quite a while.
All right. Did your diagnosis change the way how things were or how you were thinking, or does life just go on?
I think it was a good change. I think it was a very positive step, because when you don't have that diagnosis, I suppose there's always that margin of doubt. Like there's room for doubt and saying, oh well, maybe I'm not, and maybe I'm imagining it, or maybe I'm lazy when it comes to like not being able to focus. It's like, oh, I'm lazy, or I'm not as intelligent as I think I am. And it's just, I think it all kind of boils down to something that my teachers in primary school, so when I would have been like ages like 5 up until 11, some of my teachers would say to my parents, Amy's very sensitive. She's too sensitive.
Hmm.
And there was never anything kind of flagged with that. And looking back on it now, it looks as clear as the nose on my face now that I
Hmm.
know that. But I think the diagnosis is, to me, information. And with information, I can apply it and work around it and find ways to be kind to myself, and also ways to use what gifts I do have and not punish myself for the gifts I don't necessarily have. So I think it was a good positive, I suppose, empowering moment for me. Yeah.
Now, would you say that archaeology would be your hyper focus? Your special interest, the one thing that you focus in on so much that kind of
Oh,
flies.
well, may possibly. I suppose that's where things get a little bit complicated, because that's when the ADHD kind of comes in. I have that very fun and useful ADHD that's inattentive and hyperactive. So
Hmm.
just a great time. Just a great time. So I suppose I would like I want to be interested and engaged in everything all at once, immediately, right now, but also I'm not satisfied unless I start something and finish it and it's complete. And I feel like that's more of the autism side for me. So I would say like from a very young age, there was something about archaeology that really kind of called out to me. Stargate, I think, has a lot to answer for with Dr. Daniel Jackson. I thought that was amazing, like the Egyptology and the shiny things. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a magpie, but I find very much so like the process of researching something and delving into it in such depth. Yeah, that sounds like hyper focusing to me.
Now that's funny that you mentioned Stargate instead of Indiana Jones.
Of
Now,
course, I mentioned that. Yeah.
would you almost say that Indiana Jones almost glorifies what archaeology is all about?
No, I wouldn't, because he's not doing archaeology really. It's tomb raiding and punching Nazis, one of which is really, really great. It's not the tomb raiding. Tomb raiding's not good.
The punching the Nazis is, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I personally think that when his movies came out, he kind of glorified it to the point
Okay.
that's why people got drawn to it, because this is what archaeology is all about. It's going to find things. But we have a family friend whose daughter is an archaeologist, who's a curator at our museums, and she's like, it's nothing like that. You're spending more time at the dig site with little tools and cowls and trying to find tiny little bones and this and that until you hit your score.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Indiana Jones is a great adventure, but at the end of the day, it very much is just a bit of colonialism. He just goes around saying it belongs in a museum. Where did you take it from, Indy? Did you take it from the temple that belonged to people? That's theft. But yeah, archaeology very much is a science, or some people call it a soft science in quotations, I suppose. But it's a weird liminal space. It's a humanity and art, science, there's a process to it. So when you're on the field, it's a lot of documenting. You have to write out measurements, you have to draw plans and maps and record what you find, give everything a context number, take photographs. And in Ireland, you have to be covered up to your armpits in muck in the middle of winter, which is very fun, very cold. But it's a very physical manual labor job when you're on the field. When you can't dig things with machinery, you have to do it by hand with tools. And if you're in a nice place like Greece or Italy, where I have worked as well, it has its own problems as well with the heat and everything, but you can take your time. You do get your little brushes out and brush away, but for the most part, you're just covered head to toe in muck, and you're wearing Wellington boots, and you've got a bit of a pickaxe in your hand. And they say, we need to drain out that ditch over there, and the pump isn't working. So everybody line up with buckets and we'll start to drain it by hand. Very glamorous.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me, talking about Greece. I was in Greece and my tour guide's husband was a civil engineer, and they were working, and she was telling me it's a whole lot different when you're an archaeologist and a civil engineer and everything in Greece because of all their antiquities. The minute you hit an antiquity, everything stops. Archaeologists can't do archaeologists have to come in and they have to literally label every little tiny thing, and it holds up all construction work, modern construction work for their subway lines, because you're hitting ancient antiquities, things that are back during the ancient times, and you can't touch this. It becomes labeled as history.
Yes, that is something. I think there's definitely a middle ground to that, because I've worked in what we call commercial archaeology in Ireland, but it was more research archaeology when I was in Greece. But there is that kind of feeling of resentment, I suppose, towards archaeologists, because if you find archaeology on private property or near somebody's land, it's almost as if that land is seized then. So they don't want you to find things. And I absolutely understand that. I really do, because you don't want your property taken away from you. Life is hard enough. And these digs and surveys and everything, they can take quite a while. So I'm not as up maybe on the laws and the processes in Greece maybe, but I do know that in Ireland, when we need to build roads and everything, if there's any suspicion at all that there's archaeology there, that's when they kind of call in a consultancy company, and we go in, we record as much as we can, and that's when you get, you know, supervisors and directors breathing down your neck being like, this should have been finished yesterday. And it's like, when was the last time you dug a hole, John? Do you understand how hard it is? But it's quite a culture. Yeah, it has a lot of issues with sexism and ableism as well within fieldwork. I know specifically in Ireland, but I've heard of other stories as well abroad. But it's its own microcosm of issues, I suppose, too. But very meticulous work, yes. And then you'll always have one person who just doesn't know what they're doing, won't admit that they don't know what they're doing, and they mess the whole thing up. It just takes longer then.
Now, with your studies and everything else, how do you deal with your ADHD and your ASD? I mean, everyone knows when you have ADHD, it really, your focus kind of weighs in and out unless it's something you're focused on and it's your passion.
Yeah. The way that I've really managed it up until this point in my life was through the sheer anxiety of not completing my tasks. Like when I get a deadline, I'm just like, I don't want to get in trouble, because if somebody gives out to me or frowns at me funny, I'll burst into tears. So I simply must force myself to do the work. And it was so frustrating because I know that I enjoy these topics and the process so much, but if I have to sit down and force myself to engage in this, it almost feels like my brain is trying to escape out the back of my head. I just do not want to do the work. So that has been a very difficult thing, I suppose, for much of my life. And that's what's led me to getting that formal diagnosis, because it was something that had to be kind of put on the back burner quite a bit, because it's very expensive over here to see a psychiatrist. So, and then I was diagnosed in February. I only started medication, I think, last month or so. And it has been very, very helpful to just have that little bit of something chemical to just kind of be like, just get the ball rolling. And of course, like, medication isn't the answer for everything.
No.
I know that. And I managed very well without it. But the difference to me is night and day, because it felt like I would have to work nearly 100 times harder than my peers to nearly get close to the results they were getting. Like sometimes I would underperform and I'm like, this isn't right. But now I can just like sit down, I'll have my thoughts, I'll make these connections, I'll put myself out there, I'll do my research and be like, oh yes, and develop ideas and connect this to this thing. And especially with the PhD, you have to try and engage and make a name for yourself, apply for conferences and stuff. And that's how I ended up here, I suppose, was that I had this great idea, because conferences are so expensive to attend. I was like, what's the millennial solution to not having to pay $450 to speak at a convention? It's like podcasts. Excellent idea. So it's just letting your brain do brain things and not having 1,000 thoughts at once trying to cram through the door at the same time. It's like they make an orderly little queue, and I can do the things I need to do, the things I want to do. And it's revelation. It's been a revelation for me this last month or so. Yeah, it's amazing.
Now, does Ireland have any kind of resources that can help you with your ADHD and ASD?
It's not something that's really been kind of put forward to me, I suppose. Like there was discussions of occupational therapy. I had one appointment with her and she said, have you tried keeping a journal? And I was like, I can't stress to you how much I need to outsmart myself. I'm too smart. I'm too clever and too lazy, too focused on not doing the task to write it down and say, oh, well, now I'll do it. No. So I think, and I don't know how it is in other countries, but anytime you try to look up any kind of support groups, or if you have questions about ASD or ADHD, it refers back to your child or information for parents. And it's almost like there's this thought that ADHD and ASD just disappear when you grow up, or that, I don't know, like, do we all cease to exist? There's no, I mean, I'm sure there are groups out there, and I think there's some kind of discussion group and support group in the college I attend, Trinity College, Dublin, for people with ASD, but I haven't had a chance to go and have a look yet. But no, there's not really a broader discussion, and at least there certainly wasn't when I was going through the school system. It might be quite different now, but oh, it was, as we would say here, woe-just terrible.
Did you when you attended Trinity, you knew
Mhm.
you had your ASD and ADHD. Did did you find ways to help conquer your ADHD to help you with your studies? Like little tricks or turnarounds or whatever?
Um, See, I think the ADHD was something I was in denial about or didn't believe for a very long time, because a lot of my other friends had ADHD or ADD without the hyperactive part. And I was like, oh, well, the struggles they have don't seem to be the struggles I have. I'm just very diligent. I just try to sit down and get my work done, but I wasn't acknowledging that I was having difficulty with certain aspects of studying, like my focus drifting and like not being able to start the task, saying to myself, okay, at this time I'll get up. Oh, I've missed that window of opportunity. Guess it's the next hour I'll get up and do the thing. But I suppose, again, like the unhealthy way that I coped with it again was that anxiety of I need to perform this task. And that's where I suppose that thing of potential and performance kind of really slipped there. So I think with a bit of time and understanding of myself, my performance did get quite a lot better, because I knew this might take me a bit longer to complete this task. So if I had a deadline, I would start it quite a bit, like the task quite a bit earlier than my peers, perhaps. Um, because I knew myself well enough at this point to know I'm going to need all this time. Because I took 4 years away from college after I finished my undergraduate, because I was exhausted. I couldn't handle it. I thought I'm not the type of person they're looking for in academia. I don't know who that is, but it's
Mm,
not me. And
right.
I also at the time was undiagnosed with fibromyalgia,
Mm,
um, which is a whole other kettle of fish, but there is a bit of a kind of a crossover and overlap there between the not being able to focus thing with ADHD and fibromyalgia. So I was like, I don't know which is what. But I think with a bit of age and a bit of time, like stepping away, getting that perspective and learning to just kind of allow myself the space to have my struggles, to not be able to do things and accept my limitations, it let me find ways to get around it and do it in a different way, and be a bit more calm about it. And I suppose that's maturity more than anything.
mhm.
But yeah, it's been quite a steep learning curve, I suppose.
Yeah, now so your ADHD and ASD have affected your studies and you found workarounds. That's a good thing. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of students who don't have their diagnosis and don't know what's going on struggle.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh god.
going into Trinity, did you look for like a disability department to say, hey, I am diagnosed with ASD and ADHD? Are there any things you can do for me? On time tests and so on and so forth.
Again, I suppose I didn't have that formal diagnosis until this year when I started the PhD, and there's not really examinations or tests or anything, or formal assignments, so to speak. So I don't at the moment see any benefit to me to going and saying, hey, what can I get? Like, what help can I get from you? But it might be something I'll look into down the road. Like, it could be something I couldn't even think of or conceptualize. They'll say, here's a solution for a thing, and it'll be world changing, quite possibly. But again, it was that thing of not having that diagnosis and still knowing it in myself, but I did not have the financial means, I suppose, to acquire that diagnosis. It cost me €650 to get a
Yikes.
diagnosis. Yes, yikes.
And that's probably not with insurance either.
Well, I did have to go privately, so I have health insurance. It's a bit more of a regular thing, I suppose, here, and because I have so many different health conditions, I suppose, and problems, it was a good idea to have it. So I got some of that money back, but it was over a limit. Like that chunk of money was so far above a limit that they only paid me a lesser portion than what I would have thought to get it back. But if I'd gone on like a public waiting list, I'd probably still be waiting. It could be like about 2 years or so before you get an appointment. It's nuts.
Now, how do you think? Do you think in pictures? Do you think in patterns or abstractions?
That is an interesting question. I always say that I'm a very visual thinker. So if someone says a sentence to me, I do have the little pictures just appear in my head. So like if someone said a gorilla playing the saxophone while skateboarding on a crocodile, I can see that as clear as day. It's nuts. Like I just like, and so when people say like the most ridiculous kind of like euphemisms and things like that, I picture them just like, oh. So like I am very visual that way. But again, I suppose relating it back to my research and my work, that has actually been of benefit to me, because when you read about something, I can sort of conceptualize it as a 3D thing and think about how I would interact with that in person then. And if I'm lucky enough, fingers crossed, I'll be able to go over to Greece possibly next year and have a look at some artifacts and things. But it's that visual aspect is quite important, I suppose. As for patterns, you see, the thing is like, so I probably do conceptualize and think of patterns and try to trace them, but it almost feels like a background program. Like I'll just be sitting there eating my dinner and I'll just be like, I'll have like this, as I call them, big dumb brain waves, and I'll make some nutty connection and it'll just be this, it'll seem like this most brilliant thing to me. And I don't know where I got the thought from, but I'm just putting all this information in here and something must be running in the background, or something will tick over and make me think back to it, and it'll just kind of like all click together nicely. And it's, again, it's nice to have the clear-headedness to be able to make those connections as well. Yeah. So I suppose like that patterns and visualization, I suppose thinking quite literally as well when it comes to imagining things in my head might be the ASD part. And I think that's a pretty cool ability. I wouldn't call it like a superpower or anything daft, but not everybody can do that. And I think that's really cool. And it's definitely been a big help for me anyways.
Now, you'd mentioned procrastination with your studies and things and getting papers. How do you handle that? I mean, that's ADHD in a nutshell, is procrastination. We see something, we know we got to do it, and it's like, oh, I'll get it later. And then later becomes more later, and later becomes more later. And then it's like, oh, crap, it's due tomorrow. How do you handle that without going into panic mode?
I think the way that I have been managing it, and like this has been over a process developing over years, is that I know that if I leave things on the long finger, if I don't address them, I'll just be very stressed, and that'll taint my enjoyment of the relaxing things. Like if I want to play a video game or read a book, I'll still have that thought in the back of my head, like that due date is coming up. You should have been doing a bit of this, like that little bit of guilt. And that's not a nice feeling. I don't like feeling that way. So I say to myself, like, if you do just a little bit, then you can read your book, or I'll know that I'll derive more enjoyment from it. And I know it's all about chasing that dopamine, as some people say, but it's like, I know I'll get more enjoyment from it if I'm not stressed about this thing. So I think I've just taken that whole thing of knowing that I have to attack things or begin things sooner than other people has kind of carried over now. And I'm really conceptualizing things in a very, very long run and planning them out as best as I can now that I'm actually able to think. Again, the medication has been great. I'm very pleased. So I'll know, okay, so this thing is due in a few months. I'm already thinking about it. I already have like, you need to start this by now, or taking notes and saying, oh, we can mention this here, or doing a bit of extra reading. And that, it's not even that it just eliminates that bad, guilty, stressful feeling. It actually makes me feel even happier. So I'm like, look how well I'm doing. Look how far ahead I am. I suppose it's trying to balance that horrendous anxiety of the stress of having something due tomorrow and not having started it, is balancing that with gratification and enjoyment. And like it sometimes it gets away from me where it's the end of the day and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot time existed and I just spent all day I don't know, like playing Destiny 2. You know, like hours sometimes just slip away. So that is something I do kind of need to keep on top of. So like I'm sure for some people writing things down in a journal helps. Doesn't always help for me.
No.
Uh, but I suppose like again, it's the visual thinker in me. I conceptualize it and visualize it in my head and slot things in that way and just try my best, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like me when I'm medicine. I've been off of my ADHD medicine for years until I went on a trial medicine a clinical trial medicine for ASD for communications. Halfway
Okay.
through the trial, right in the middle of COVID, they said, "Oh, we're not getting the results we want. We're canceling the trial."
Mm,
But I made a really good friend with the therapist that was running the thing, and I became his client. And I said, "I need something to help with focus." So he says, "Okay, I'm putting you on Adderall."
okay.
I couldn't take the 5 milligrams. It was just too much for my heart. It felt like I was
Mm,
running a race. I
yeah,
couldn't even take a half because I still had that aggression going in. So he says, "Okay, I'm going to put you on the smallest amount possible," and that worked. But when I
that's
take
brilliant.
it, my focus is on point. I'm focused, and when I know I have something, and I want to play something or do something, I say, "You're going to do your work first, and then you'll play as a
Mm,
reward."
yes.
And it works for me because then that keeps me on point and on track of
Mm,
get everything done.
yeah. I that is something that very much resonates. That like these medications, they are great to help you think, but they can have quite a toll on the body.
Oh yeah.
Because I started out with Concerta and I was like, okay, Anna, this is fine. But it wasn't fine. My heart was racing, and I'm on some different medications for other things as well.
Mhm.
So eventually I went to the nurse and I was like, well, check my blood pressure and everything. And she took my heart rate and she was like, oh, that's too high. So I came straight off it and we started then on Ritalin instead. And it's definitely been a lot more gentle. And I don't feel that same almost manic, for lack of a better word, that intense focus, that intense energy of I have to do all of these things right now. And it was almost overwhelming. But I feel like Ritalin for me at the moment, anyways, is just, oh, I have this thing I need to do. Okay, but I better go sit down and I'll start it and I'll enjoy it. And I'm still able to eat food and my heart is healthy and happy, nice and low. I can exercise and not worry about it. But I
Mhm.
think that's definitely a challenge that it almost seems unfair, really, that we've had this hand dealt to us that
Yeah.
we have to choose. Sometimes we have to choose, like, do you want to enjoy eating your Christmas dinner or do you want to be present and hold a conversation?
Mhm.
uh, it does sometimes feel unfair, and trying to find that balance can be quite challenging as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, when it's like, do you want to be, like you said, do you want to be with it or do you want to be like a walking zombie the rest of your life, not being
Yeah.
able to focus on anything?
Yeah.
I mean, for the early part of my life, we never knew what I had.
Mm.
And it was, oh, he has he's learning his disabilities. Let's put him on Siler, which is a stimulant. That worked great.
Okay.
And then they were like, it's got problems with the heart or the liver. Let's take it off of him, put him on something that's non-stimulant. So they put me
Mm.
on Stratera. I felt like a freaking zombie.
No.
I was
Yeah.
so out of it. I was just so out of it. I tried and I tried and I tried and I just felt horrible.
Yeah.
And I took myself off of it. And I told my doctors and they're like, okay. And I've been off of it until recently and then I went on Adderall and it's just like a switch.
Yeah.
You feel focused, you're able to enjoy. But then, like you say, you also have the downside of that medicine, which are the side effects.
Yeah.
Do
And they're,
you go
sorry,
on?
please. No,
Go
you
on,
go
you
ahead.
first. Do you deal with those side effects? I mean, I know Adderall gives you insomnia. Does your medicine give you anything side effects that you have to deal with?
Well, like I was saying, when I started out with the Concerta, very much like my heart was quite elevated. So my resting heart rate would be like maybe 53 at rest. And if I'm up at about maybe in the 60s, which is great because I exercise a lot, I walk and I cycle, it's good. But when I was taking the Concerta, I was sitting down, it would be at 100, which
Wow.
is very, very high. So that was intense. And like my hands get quite cold, like the
Hmm.
circulation thing and clammy, and I sweat more and it's and like my appetite would be very much kind of killed off as well. So eating in the middle of the day was very challenging. So I didn't enjoy that at all. So then like the Ritalin does seem to suit me quite a bit better, but it was that trial and error of having to go through those horrible, horrible symptoms to find something where,
Hmm.
like you said, it's like a switch where it's just okay, let's just blow all this fog away and now on you go, and I can eat my food. I'm not, my heart isn't racing constantly. I can think clearly. It's very pleasant. But I've had this conversation with so many of my friends is that people who don't take medication, if they demonize it particularly, don't realize that there's people like you and I that have to take
Hmm.
these medicines and substances just to get on their baseline
Mm.
of
Yeah.
wellness
Yes.
and they don't appreciate that it's a struggle just to function sometimes, that we're not taking this just because we want to have the label of, oh, I have ASD or I have ADHD. We don't want our labels. We just want to be able to function and get through life and enjoy it. And it's very frustrating to talk to people like that who have never had a thing wrong with them a day in their life and feel so judgmental. It's very challenging, absolutely.
I
And
mean,
I feel,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, there are, yeah, like you're saying, there are those who look at us and think, how can you have it? You seem perfectly normal, and that's the imposter syndrome. They don't see that other
Yes.
side.
No. I had that yesterday actually. I was talking to an older lady and I said, well, I have ADHD and ASD. And she said, well, you don't seem like someone who has autism. And I was like, well, what's your experience of autism? Is it a young boy screaming and throwing things? Because that's not the universal experience. Like I have my moments. I don't like, there's times where I really do not like being touched. I've had to like rigorously train myself and mask constantly to be able to look people
Mm.
in the eyes when I have a conversation. And sometimes I've never drank a drop of alcohol in my life, never taken an illicit substance. But if I'm out having a nice time, people will ask me what drugs I'm taking because they just assume, and I'm just enjoying my life. But they're like, "Oh, you're nuts! You must be taking XYZ, whatever." But it's people don't want to see autism in what in a different package. They expect something and the outside looks like
Yes,
a different
yes,
thing than
so
what they're
true.
expecting, and they're like, well, that can't be the case.
I
It's
mean,
nonsense.
it's like when you face those people who um who always come up, oh, you don't look like you have autism. I mean, it's the ableism in a lot of people. It's like they
Mm-hmm.
don't think what's coming out of their
Yeah.
mouth.
No.
I mean, one of our benefits, I guess you can say, it's a benefit, and it's also a negative, is we have no filter. So
Very much so.
we say what's on our mind to the point to we don't care.
Yeah,
And people think, oh, you don't
absolutely.
care about what you're saying to me. Wrong. It's I can't stop myself.
Very much so.
And there's a story
Yeah.
behind that with me. I used to volunteer at our planetarium. We had a every Thursday night of the month, the third Thursday of the month, we'd have a huge adult party, and it would be themed. Well, one time I was working, and we had this elderly couple, retired couple. The woman was a school teacher, and the husband, he was an engineer. And I came upstairs, and I see them standing by the wall. And the first thought that comes into my head is, "Oh, look! Have you heard? There's a new dance for the old people. It's called standing still." And she just looked at me and she goes, "I'll get you later." Now, I told that to my supervisor, who happens to also be on the spectrum, and so her kids, and she's like, "It's a good thing she's a teacher, Reed. She knows you're joking, and that's why she came back
Yeah.
with that retort."
Yeah, I mean, as replies go, that was fairly decent. Yeah. There have been times where I stay awake at night thinking about something I said maybe 5 years but
Hmm.
earlier, it's not that I don't care what people think. I do care because I
Yeah,
don't
you
want to
do.
be mistreated or bullied, but at the same time, like you said, I don't necessarily always have a filter, and I'm honest to a fault, which is great because most people around me know that I'll never lie to them. But at the same time, sometimes I say things that can sound very harsh and cruel, and I really don't mean that. And I don't like hurting people, of course not. And it's, yeah, it is very challenging sometimes to find that effective means of communicating with people, and trying to hold yourself back nearly sometimes, especially I suppose now that academia, and particularly classics, is very much networking and talking to
Mhm.
people, making allies, making friends, making contacts, and always trying to make like this good impression. Oh, it's exhausting, and I feel quite anxious beforehand when I have to go to an event or seminars or anything. Yeah.
I know that feeling all too well. When I was traveling, every time I had to get to the airport, I just felt so much anxiety, like, why am I doing this? And then the minute I get on the plane, it just like melts away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for me, it almost seems sometimes that I overact, and I can come across like as very funny, or I suppose goofy or buffoonish. And I tried to nip that in the bud, but
Mm.
it's been a learning curve as well. But you're right. Sometimes you worry about it so much before you go into it, and you're like, I'm not going to have a good time. You tell yourself you're not
Mhm.
going to have a good time, and then for me, I start talking to people, and I have great conversations, and I don't know what it is, but I suppose I maybe it's maturing or perspective back. I've just have become so unashamed of who I am that I will tell people to be like, oh yeah, I have this, I have that. And I say, oh, I talk a lot, but sure, what are you going to do about it? And some people actually ended up kind of finding it charming or interesting. And I've ended up making some good impressions. And I think
Mhm.
deciding to not mask or to hide has made me less likely to say like the wrong thing. It's definitely been interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Now, do you deal with racing thoughts?
yes,
How
very
do
much
you handle
so.
that? I mean, that drives me nuts to the point where I
Mhm.
can't even meditate without all of a sudden realizing, oh shit, there goes, I'm not thinking about the meditation, I'm thinking about something else, and I gotta push myself back.
Yeah, yeah. That is a challenge, I suppose. It's just like my head is filled with noise and nonsense. Um, as for when I'm researching and writing and things like that, if sometimes if I'm on my own at home, I'll read out loud to myself so that I can hear
Mhm.
it and get the information to go in. But sometimes I've noticed that I'll be reading out loud, but I'll be thinking of something else. I don't know if I've said the right words or not, but I catch it then and I'm like, okay, you need to just like get up, move around, go get a drink, do something like that. So I try to change where I'm stood or where I'm sat, which is something I can do now in my PhD work again, because it's very much like solitary. I just go into the library, I sit down, I'm my own boss nearly. But when I was in undergraduate or classes,
Oh,
or in my master's for the classes and exams and stuff, that is not an option. And
no,
sometimes I just have to accept, okay, well, the rest of this class is an absolute loss. Hopefully they say something that sounds outrageous or interesting that drags me back in. But there have been times in the past where I've just had to accept, no, I'm not going to be able to concentrate on this whatsoever. And that's very frustrating because I you always go into it with the best intentions. Doesn't always work out that way.
yeah. Tell me about it. I literally, for my undergrad, or not my undergrad, for my master's, I literally forced myself to sit up front. And still, I figured, oh, if I sit up front, I'll be able to focus. He's right in my face. He, I'm able to look at the board, no distraction. Wrong. I wound up walking away not with a master's, but with a postgrad because they said my dissertation wasn't good enough.
Oh dear. Yeah.
But I still
I mean,
took it as a master's. It's still a master's minus a
oh
couple
yeah.
credits.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've done that old trick as well. I do tend to sort of sit up towards the top of classes as well, so I won't be looking at what everyone else is doing. But I suppose just so I can hear what they're saying as well, because sometimes I might hear the words perfectly fine, but they get a bit scrambled, and I don't know if I just like concentrate on what they're saying really hard. I tell myself I might be able to figure out what they're saying. But for my master's, I had the great idea to do my master's in the year 2020 for that horrible global unnamed event happened, and I had to do the entire thing at home.
Oh God. So you had to deal with every little distraction that could happen to somebody.
Oh yeah. Oh
Oh
yeah.
my God. And you couldn't
Hmm.
leave. You're stuck in your house.
Yeah,
You had to
pretty
wear a
much.
mask. You had to pay attention when you did online classes.
Yes,
Oh
absolutely. I just had
God.
to sit around at home looking at a Zoom screen to do classes at, and I was supposed to have done readings, and I did do the readings, which was great. So I got on so much better at my master's than I did at my undergrad, but that was definitely a unique, I suppose, hopefully once in a lifetime challenge,
Mm.
having to attend college from home because I couldn't get library books or anything.
Oh God.
Because traveling between counties was pretty much like was called to a halt, and I live in a different county than Dublin, so that's where the college is. So I got a special letter from the government and from the college to say that I had the right to travel between counties. And I would get someone to drive me up, and I'd bring a suitcase, and I'd have already ordered all of these books, and I'd pick them up, put them in my suitcase, and travel home again.
Oh God.
Which was it was unique, definitely.
I
But
have to
yeah.
say, I think the pandemic really hurt a lot of people.
Mhm.
All the school, all those kids that were supposed to graduate, never got
Oh
the
yeah.
proper graduation, never got
No.
the proper education.
Mm-mm.
I mean, we have a member of our family on my sister-in-law's side who's a teacher, and we were talking about this over Thanksgiving, and she's like, the kids, because of the parents, the kids really not did not get a good education because the parents weren't parenting the kids.
Okay. Yeah.
She's like,
Yeah.
because the kids wouldn't listen, they would keep their cameras off, the parents weren't behind them saying, listen, you gotta pay attention.
Yeah, that's true. And at the same time, though, as well, like the parents would have to try and work from home too.
Yeah,
So they couldn't do that job of the school teacher monitoring or parenting either. Yeah. I know that my brother, he had to become an impromptu like biology and history teacher, like for his daughter. And it was insane the amount of work that was placed at the feet of parents of kids in schools. Absolutely. But there was definitely a lot of unique challenges, and it wasn't the full college experience to be sure,
no,
but as well as that, I think it really showed, in the past when they say, oh, it's not possible to accommodate fully for people who can't travel into college, like if you're
yeah,
disabled, that was a lie. They just didn't do it because they didn't want to. Like Zoom classes and hybrid events are still very much a thing now. So
yeah,
it shows they could have done it all along. So for me, yes, I had those distractions, but with fibromyalgia comes a certain level of exhaustion, and traveling up to college and sitting in person, and it's quite exhausting. So I got to save a lot of that energy by just having to make it to my computer and attend class that way. So in that way, I feel I have more energy and time to dedicate to my studies for sure. But at the same time, of course, I didn't have the same resources. I couldn't meet my colleagues in person. It was quite isolating and solitary. But it definitely, I think, shows that there's more we can do for the needs of people with disabilities in an academic setting, in work settings, that working
mhm,
from home is a thing that can be done. And it's been a thing we could have done quite a while now, but until it affected everybody, nobody cared. And that is so frustrating. It is so frustrating to be singled out in that way.
yeah. I mean, pen. I mean, school should have reimbursed the kids for not tuition, but for accommodations. I mean, what they spent over a year home? That all that money they spent on their dorm rooms or their flats went was like burning money. It's money lost. The
Yeah.
schools could have been smarter and said, "Hey, we understand what's going on. We're going to refund you this amount of money for the year that would have been spent for your dorm room." But they
Yeah.
never did.
Uh, I think for me, like I wouldn't have been living in Dublin anyways because I am lucky enough that I can commute quite easily, which is nice, and it's cheaper because rent in Ireland, specifically Dublin, is outrageous. It's disgraceful. Shame on them all. Shame on all of the landlords. Half of them are in the government. Shame on them because they're the ones making the laws and charging that amount of money and saying, "Oh, there's a housing crisis." Well, just live with your parents and wait for them to die, and then you can have a house.
What?
Disgusting.
Very
It's a whole
disgusting.
big issue here, but it's neither here nor there. At least, in Ireland, the colleges did refund some of the fees back to the students. It's something. But that being said, there's always a lot more that colleges and governments can be doing to help education and funding of education. Like the limited means of getting funding and grants in Ireland for, I suppose, PhD specifically, the PhD research is disgraceful. There's not enough opportunity to secure that funding. And in my particular case, I have no choice. I have to live at home with my parents. And I'm lucky enough that we have a very solid and good relationship. But I do not have the means to move out. I'm on a disability allowance. My father is on his old age pension. My mother has very, very little income. She doesn't work also. But the only social benefit package that is disregarded when I'm applying for government funding for my research is mine, not my father's old age pension. That is taken into account, and because of that, I don't get funding. That's disgraceful. That is disgraceful and horrendous and very frustrating.
I mean, welcome to my world. I'm on disability as well. I mean, I have ASD, I have ADHD, I have OCD, and I am also dyslexic. I live at home. I'm on
Yeah.
disability. My mom's not working. She
Yeah.
works on occasion and whatever. And now we're dealing with a whole new problem. Social Security somehow hit a glitch and said, "Oh, somebody said that you called and said you were deceased." So now we're dealing with
Yeah.
the fact that we had to go all. We thought we corrected it over the phone, and no, you have to go to the office, and then we did that, and the guy says it'll be 7 to 10 days before you get your money, and then we got to go back and fix everything with me, so I get my money because my money is divvied out to her.
Yeah.
So
It's
we're
it's
not getting any money.
yeah. It's not okay. It's really not. And there's so many of these kinds of mistakes happen, and there are so many people who need this welfare and this funding who don't receive it. And I think I think that's a universal issue. Absolutely. Yeah. Um it's something that kind of can become a roadblock as well for anything you want to do in your life, because it's already hard enough um being disabled, to try and circumnavigate that and get around it, find ways to move on through. But in Ireland, at least, like, we get our payment once a week, which is great. It's not fantastic, but it's something. But you're restricted then in how, like, if you want to get a job and how much you can work, otherwise you will lose the benefit. And it makes no sense. And up until recently as well, there was a law recently passed that stopped the government from pulling disability benefit from PhD students who had gotten funding, because
Mm.
that was something that was happening, that a disabled student had won a grant and got funding for his studies, and the government was like, no more disability benefit for you. Absolutely. And then there's these kinds of oversights that you would think are so obvious and easy to overcome and anticipate, that it's not thought about, it's not considered until it becomes a problem and someone has a voice loud enough to decry it and kind of stand up for this kind of issue. It's nuts.
Now, with your ASD and ADHD, do you deal with self-doubt or second guessing yourself a lot?
Yeah, I think it's very much been a big part of life, I suppose, is that the imposter syndrome, as you mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
because I have had a myriad of health issues, but that whole thing that I'd always tell myself I was just being lazy, or that I just wasn't a nice person when I would accidentally say something in the wrong tone or say the wrong words and hurt someone's feelings. I would just be like, well, there's nothing like special about you, like you're just not a great person, I would say to myself. And like, you would just I would be very harsh on myself for things that I didn't know that I couldn't necessarily help, or that I hadn't learned to appropriately cope with yet. And I would punish myself and say, well, I must just be an inherently unlikable person because I had such trouble making friends as a child. But I suppose over time, that kind of self-doubt has been whittled away quite a bit, thankfully, through a wonderful network of very supporting friends and a very supportive family. Because I remember thinking growing up, I was always told, oh, you're a very intelligent child, you're very smart, and you'll do great in college, you should go to college and all this. And I did my undergraduate. I didn't get the results I wanted to get. I found it very difficult. And I thought, maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am. I'm not as hard a worker as I think I am. I can't do this. There's no point to it. So I didn't think I would ever go back. And it had always been my dream to be Dr. O'Keefe of archaeology, like an archaeologist. And I said my dreams were shattered at that point because I couldn't manage it as like anyone else could, because I had these undiagnosed issues. So taking that time out, I took like 4 or 5 years. I went and I worked. I got some diagnoses for the fibromyalgia. I like sorted a couple of things out, and just taking that step back, maturing, reassessing myself, being kind to myself. When I went back to do a master's, I said to myself at the beginning of the year, just do your best. You can't do any better than your best. It doesn't matter. You're not in a race with anybody else. There is no podium. There
Hmm.
is a finish line, sure, but it's not a time trial. It's, you can get there whenever you can manage to get there. You're not, and I didn't make myself compete against my peers. So I was a bit more relaxed about it, and just like being honest with myself and being kinder to myself helped with that self-doubt. And in the end, that helped me perform better than I could have imagined. Like after my first assignment, I got first class marks back, and I was like, oh my goodness, I am actually very capable. I didn't think I was. This is amazing. And I had learned more than I thought I had, and I could apply it better by being kinder to myself and not always second guessing and doubting. Now, I still do sometimes. There's still sometimes things where I'm like, oh, I can't do that, or it would be very difficult for me. But sometimes it's okay to push yourself beyond your comfort zone, because you'll find the comfort zone is bigger
Hmm.
than you ever could have imagined.
Now, do you mask or do you not care anymore what people think?
I suppose it depends. Uh, because again, it's something I've been doing for a very, very long time, and something I learned to do. And I can't always know what's really Amy and what's the mask. I don't always know what's real and what's kind of made up. Um, so I suppose there are times where I'm trying to be better about talking in my own normal accent when I'm talking to other Irish people, because of a class thing. When I first went to college, I was made fun of for my, Midlands country accent, and they
So you don't love
deemed
your
me,
accent.
well, this isn't this is the accent I use when I'm talking to people not from Ireland, so I can actually be understood.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yeah. So there's still a little bit of masking, but I sometimes wonder if perhaps it might be better termed as maybe code switching, or trying to pass as, or be deemed more acceptable. And I think no matter what, no matter how much I tell myself that I don't have to wear the mask anymore, that I don't have to pretend to be a certain way, I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm going to have to, because we don't live in an ideal world. And opportunities that are laid before me, particularly like in academia, if I want to um get into good programs or go to certain conventions and things like this, I need to speak a certain way and give off an aura of, what people deem to be intelligent or sounding intelligent or smart. Even though, sometimes you can term something simply and it means the exact same thing as if you had used a thesaurus, but it doesn't matter because there's all of these ideas and biases of what is intelligent, what is an academic. And I'm trying to establish myself, to be sure, and still stay true to who I am. But I also know there are times where I'll have to compromise on that. So with masking, I suppose on my day-to-day life, I don't really. I have made I wouldn't know if it's an error or not, but when I'm in the library, it's kind of on a little, like a little square thing. And I sometimes will look off into the distance to think, and I will make a face that very much looks like a scowl, and there'll be someone on the other end, but I don't notice that there's a person there, and I will give them a very, very dirty look. And they will think I've taken against them, and I won't notice. So there's still moments like that, but there's other times, of course, where I try to be a bit more refined and seem more academic and intelligent, because that's how I'll be able to get in to the system and try to change it from within.
So what has attracted you to archaeology?
That is a good question. I think, again, going back to like the TV shows and everything of like Stargate, we also watched Xena Warrior Princess, like
my favorite. I love Xena.
Yes.
Xena and Hercules.
Oh yes, both very, very good.
I mean,
but it was that
I own the album. I own the entire series, so.
Oh yeah, we have both on DVD as well. But it was that interest in stories, I think. Like history is full of stories, mythology is full of stories, and then objects as well, like items and shiny things, because my dad he's very much into like Egyptian. I can like the Egyptian imagery and aesthetic of like these golden things, the mystery of like discovering something amazing and fantastic, that what we would term Egyptomania in archaeology. And that kind of like got me interested in it. And my parents, God bless them, they didn't have much money when I was growing up, but they would, if I ever wanted a book, there'd be a book. If I wanted to have the book, they would get it for me. So I had endless amounts of Egyptology and like archaeology books and all of these fun things, and I just would read up on it, and I always thought it was so interesting. And then I found out it was something you could actually do as a job and that I could go to college for it. And I had the very unique chance that just a few meters down the road from where I live, there was an archaeological site when I was quite young, and my parents would take me down and we would talk to the archaeologists on site and they would tell us about it. And I was just, my mind was blown. It felt like some great mystery waiting to be cracked, something to like tap into. It just felt almost like it was filled with light and golden, and something I wanted to embrace so much. And I thought to myself that this is something I could do, because I do like my stories. I do like talking about things, and I love my art. And I did art history as well in college. So the two very much kind of lended to one another. But I think it's that interest in narrative and storytelling. And we have so much of the past behind us, and only a small portion of it has been told, because they always say history is written by the victors. But then you must also remember the victors all have agendas and biases, and they'll leave people out or forget about them or don't even know they exist. So we really do need to have as many people as possible looking back on how we represent our history, how we think about the past. So I'm like, yep, that's a great job for me. I can do that. I love complaining about how grumpy old men write about things relating to the archaeology of women. I love it.
Now, what would you say to people who are just now recently getting diagnosed with ASD or ADHD? What would you tell them?
I suppose my psychiatrist really said it well. because in my diagnosis appointment, my mum was with me. It was over Zoom, of course it was. But my mum was sitting with me, and I suppose she was like born back in very much Catholic Ireland, and thought, oh, there's not on purpose, but that there's something wrong with you. And she didn't want there to be anything wrong with me and to be excluded from life and have a difficult time. I think that's her care, was that I have the best possible life I can have, and she felt I deserved it. But he said to both of us that, like, it's not necessarily a label, but it doesn't mean like that there's things you can't do. Like, there are things you can't do, but there are also a lot of things that you can do that other people can't. And just remember that. And I think that is true, that we don't all have to be normal, or what is perceived to be normal, that there are things that I can do that other people can't do. And sure, there are things that other people can't do that other people can do that I can't. I mean, my brother is far better at maths than I am. I can't stand it, but that's the way it is with everybody. And that it, at the end of the day, it isn't a life-changing diagnosis, not really. It's just information. And if you're getting that diagnosis, is particularly in adulthood, a part of you has always known. And if you've made it this far, a bit more knowledge will probably just make it even easier. And as another friend of mine says, there's no prizes for doing things the hard way. So you need to try and make life as easy for yourself as possible. So yeah, information is power. And knowing how to get around these things and understanding why you might react to something a certain way or feel a certain way about something is good to know, because you can adjust accordingly or move around it however you need to. And it's not the end of the world. It really isn't. It might just be the beginning for some people.
I mean, that kind of reminds me of what I was told when I first went away for school for a learning disability.
Mm-hmm.
We were sat with, it was a dinner, and we were sat with older students who were former, and the student turned to me and he goes, "Listen, you're gonna realize that it's gonna take you longer than it's gonna take a normal student to finish their work. Where it takes them 1 hour, it's gonna take you 2 to 3. 1 hour to read it, another hour to process it, and then that other hour to understand it."
Yeah.
I mean, one of the best things I've ever told when I was going for my master's was one of my disability advisors, and she goes, "There's a difference between knowing your material, and there's a difference between knowing it and understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
Those who know it are those who just want to memorize the information and just pass the test. Those who know it and understand it can literally recite it and understand what they're reciting." And that happened to me once. I was going through my notes for my exam in my head, and I literally understood what I was talking about. And I told her this, and she's like, "See, by going over your notes and going over it and over it and then absorbing it, you're understanding what you're talking about."
Yeah. And that understanding as well is very important and can sometimes be unique, because again, like, there are so many different types of people in this world, and having ASD or having ADHD can be a unique perspective. And sometimes that means we can see things a little bit differently, or we see things other people don't, and can make those connections then. Or by having to do that extra bit of work and work that little bit harder, we might see a detail someone else missed. And I think that
Mhm.
that is really, really valuable. And a lot of the most intelligent and brilliant people I've ever met in my life are on the spectrum,
Yeah.
funnily enough.
I mean, like Dr. Temple Grandin had said it, those who are on the spectrum care more about what they're focused on than those who aren't.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah. And because I know myself that I take my research very close to my heart. I live and I breathe it. It becomes my entire life sometimes. But you may not always get that same passion with someone who doesn't have the same condition.
Mhm.
So there has to be something to it. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason we like I've done very well with my research so far. You know.
And finally, where can people learn more about you?
But I suppose on the Trinity College Dublin classics page, there's like a little blurb about me, but I suppose watch this space. I do have a Facebook as well. But at the moment I'm just trying to establish myself. I don't have a lot of social media. Maybe I should change that. But yeah, just working away, trying my best.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That was Amy O'Keefe, archaeologist. Thank you so much,
Thank
Amy.
you. Thank you so much for having me.
Not a problem.